March 14, 1849, Lowndes County, Alabama. By dawn, the courthouse was nothing but a shell, its columns blackened like burned teeth. But in the ash, investigators found something that didn't fit the official story. 3 sets of human remains shackled deep beneath the foundation. No one spoke their names. No one asked why they were there, because everyone in Lowndes County already knew. The records that burned that night, property deeds, marriage licenses, slave inventories, conveniently included one estate the county preferred to forget, Belle River Plantation, and the family that ruled it like a kingdom unto itself, the Suttons, 2 sisters who inherited their father's cruelty and refined it into something colder. For generations, descendants whispered about what happened there between 1847 and 1849, the 2 years that disappeared from the county's memory. They spoke of the twins, Sarah and Catherine Sutton, daughters of Colonel Nathaniel Sutton, and of a man named Marcus, a slave who somehow learned to read, to write, and document everything before he vanished into myth. What survived came from fragments, letters sealed for over a century, hospital records from Mobile, abolitionist testimonies locked away until the 1960s. Every line points to one truth. Belle River was more than a plantation. It was an experiment. So before we open that archive, understand this: what you're about to hear wasn't meant for daylight. These were the kinds of records burned on purpose, the kinds of stories that unravel the moral fabric of entire nations. If you've made it this far, you're already complicit. You're already looking into a mirror the history books refuse to show. This story doesn't begin with a fire. It begins with a funeral 2 years earlier, the death of a man who believed he could breed perfection, and the daughters who decided to prove him wrong. Welcome to Belle River. Once you enter, you don't come back unchanged. The funeral took place under a low gray sky, the kind that flattens everything it touches. No wind, no birds, just the stillness of wet earth and the smell of camphor rising from linen. They buried Colonel Nathaniel Sutton behind the magnolias at Belle River, in a grave dug so deep it seemed he was being returned to the dark he came from. Only a handful of men attended: local planters, an attorney from Mobile, and the overseer, Jonas Pritchett, who stood apart like a servant afraid of catching grief. But what everyone remembered wasn't the coffin or the sermon. It was the daughters. Sarah and Catherine Sutton stood on opposite sides of the grave, dressed in identical mourning gowns, faces pale as carved marble. They didn't weep. They didn't tremble. When the pastor's voice broke over the words, "Our Father who art in heaven," Catherine laughed, soft, short, and sharp as a splinter snapping. Sarah took her hand. No one said a word. By nightfall, the sisters had dismissed the household servants and sealed their father's study. Lamps burned in that room until dawn for 3 nights straight. Through the keyhole, a faint scratching could be heard, pen on paper, the sound of someone rewriting history. On the 4th morning, the attorney arrived to read the will. He expected confusion, maybe hysteria. What he found was precision. Every document was labeled, every ledger cataloged, the twins seated together like clerks of the same mind. The will named them joint executors of the Sutton estate, an unprecedented arrangement for 2 women, let alone 2 women who, in the eyes of Alabama law, might not have been entirely white. The attorney hesitated. This cannot stand," he said. "Your father's instructions defy every statute in this state." Sarah replied first. "Then the state will have to bend." Catherine smiled. "Or burn." That night, new locks appeared on every door in the main house. The overseer received a written order sealed in wax: "Continue operations. Do not alter the schedule." But he noticed one detail that chilled him. The signature line bore both sisters' names, written in identical hand. power, you see, as a scent when it changes hands, a metallic sweetness like blood in the air. Belle River was breathing again, but differently. Its pulse no longer matched the Colonel's. It had found a new rhythm, two hearts beating as one.
The first mention of Marcus appears in a plantation inventory from 1842. Male, age approximately 20, literate, skilled in carpentry. Nothing more. No surname, no note of origin, no family connections, just a line of property. But inside that single omission lies the story that burned a county to its bones. Marcus had learned to read from a traveling preacher who couldn't bear to see another bright mind wasted. It was a crime then, punishable by death. But Marcus had the kind of mind that remembered everything, a silent precision that made men uneasy. By the time Colonel Sutton noticed, it was too late. Marcus was indispensable. He maintained the house, repaired the locks, handled the instruments the Colonel used in his so-called studies. He saw things no one else was allowed to see, and he remembered all of it. After the Colonel's funeral, Marcus began writing. Not openly, never in daylight. At night, he'd steal scraps of paper from the study and press them flat under the floorboards of the carriage house. He wrote what he saw, what he overheard, and what he felt shifting in the air around the Sutton twins. The journal began like observation, careful, detached. But the tone changed after February 14th, 1847. That was the night he was summoned to the main house and ordered to remove the mirror from the Colonel's study. When he lifted it from the wall, he found another mirror hidden behind it. Smaller, older, the silver backing almost gone. Etched into the frame were words in Latin. Ut generate dominionem, to breed dominion. Marcus wrote, "The sister stood behind me as I worked. Miss Sarah asked if I believed the dead could speak through glass. Miss Catherine said, 'They already do. You just don't listen long enough.' And then they laughed together, like children who found a secret." From that night, Marcus wrote in code, a mixture of Latin, phonetic spellings and symbols only he could understand. He recorded the shipments that arrived after dark, the people who disappeared without record, the books that came from New Orleans wrapped in oilcloth. He didn't yet know what the sisters were building, only that whatever it was, it required silence. And in Lowndes County, silence was the most valuable currency of all. By spring, Marcus's handwriting had changed. The early pages were tidy, each word lined and even, a craftsman's mark. The later pages tilt as though the words themselves leaned away from what they were forced to record. He no longer wrote about the fields or the work. He wrote about time, how it seemed to slow inside the house, how the clocks began to tick out of rhythm, how conversations repeated themselves in perfect symmetry. The twins had turned their father's study into a laboratory of memory. They ordered Marcus to recopy every ledger, every record, every birth and sale. Whole names vanished under his quill. Others appeared, invented by the sisters to fill the gaps. When he asked why, Sarah answered softly, "Because memory is a kind of ownership," Catherine added, "and what's owned can be remade." Marcus realized then that Belle River's new experiment wasn't in flesh, but in truth. They were testing whether control of the written word could outlive the grave. The plantation itself was being rewritten, one ledger at a time, until even its ghosts would lose their names. He began his own counterwork in secret. Between the lines of the false ledgers, he wove ciphers, reversed initials, crooked numbers, faint dots where letters should have been, hidden patterns that only a patient eye could read. Each mark, he wrote in his private journal, is a seed buried in ash. One day, someone will see the shape beneath the lie. But the sisters saw more than he expected. One evening, Catherine lingered in the doorway as he worked. "You write differently now. The ink feels nervous," she said. Marcus kept his eyes on the page. Sarah touched the ledger's spine. "Do you believe paper can remember us?" she asked. He nodded, though not in agreement. That night, he added a final line in his own book. They watch the ink as if it breathes. From then on, Marcus no longer described the days. He described the walls, the mirrors, the way reflections lingered half a second too long. He began to suspect the sisters were copying not merely ledgers, but themselves into the house, into the record, into the story that would replace every other. And somewhere in the margins of his notes, a new phrase appeared again and again, scrawled as if by another hand. Truth dies only when the last witness forgets. By midsummer, Belle River's air grew thick and metallic, like a storm waiting to fall. The heat made everything shimmer: distance, memory, even sanity. The twins rarely went outside now, their lives folded inward, absorbed by the endless work of rewriting. But Marcus noticed something new in their ritual. The codes weren't only in his hands anymore. It began with the books in the library. When he dusted them, he saw small pins pressed between pages, brass needles glinting in the candlelight, placed in patterns too deliberate to be accidents. The same pattern reappeared on letters, on wall hangings, in the arrangement of silverware at dinner. 2, then 1, 1, then 2, a rhythm, a language. He started to understand what the twins were doing. They were no longer speaking aloud, not to him, not even to each other. Instead, they communicated through placement, through pattern. The entire house had become a cipher. Curtains opened at the same angle every morning. Lamps burned for exactly 7 hours. Footsteps aligned with the grandfather clock's pendulum, never a beat off. To the untrained eye, it was perfection. To Marcus, it was control, an invisible geometry tightening around everyone inside those walls. He wrote, "They are building a kind of order. I think it comforts them, but order this precise leaves no room for breath. The house is suffocating." That night, while cleaning the study, he found something hidden in the colonel's old desk drawer. A folded sheet of vellum covered in faint mirrored writing. When he held it up to the lamplight, the words revealed themselves. "We see you seeing us." The paper wasn't old. The ink was fresh. He didn't sleep that night. He wrote in his secret book instead, hand trembling as he pressed the pencil to the page. If they know, then they allow it. If they allow it, it serves a purpose. The question is, whose? The next morning, one of the false ledgers had been moved from its place, open halfway through. The page where he'd hidden his last cipher stood exposed, a small dot of ink circled twice in red. And beneath it, written in a different hand, neat, slanted, unmistakably feminine, was a single phrase. "Keep writing. We want to see how far you'll go." From that moment, Marcus understood. This wasn't secrecy anymore. It was invitation. By late summer, the house had gone unnaturally quiet. Bells that once marked the hours hung motionless. Servants whispered that time itself seemed to stall inside Belle River, as though every clock obeyed a command no one could hear. Marcus kept working, copying, repairing, writing at night by the weak light of the candle stub. He told himself that if he could simply record everything, the world beyond the plantation might one day understand what had happened here. But the messages continued. A folded note left on his workbench. "Truth is a circle. Walk far enough and you end where we stand." A page in a ledger rearranged while he slept. The sister's eyes following him, always calm, always curious. Sarah and Catherine began to blur together. When one spoke, the other finished her sentence. When Marcus addressed one of them, the answer seemed to come from both of them. "We are writing too," Sarah told him once, her voice steady. "You think it's your story, but it's ours." He could not tell whether it was a threat or an admission. The next entries in his journal grew shorter. The words pressed harder into the paper, the pencil breaking often. "They know," he wrote. "I am not a witness. I am a page. The house listens." Still, he couldn't stop. Writing had become the only proof that his mind was his own. The more the sisters tightened their grip on the plantation's narrative, the more Marcus fought to describe what couldn't be seen. The weight of obedience, the way silence echoed louder than any shout. In the evenings, he watched them from the shadows of the veranda. They spoke to each other in low tones, sometimes not at all, yet their movements synchronized like the swing of a pendulum. Whatever they were building, it no longer belonged to their father's ambitions. It was something more abstract, a system of belief made from control itself. On the first day of September, he found the mirror again, the smaller one hidden behind its twin. The Latin words were still etched in the frame. Beneath them, new scratches had appeared, delicate but deliberate, carved by a sharper hand. Ut memoret dominium. To remember dominion. He realized, then, that the experiment was complete. The twins had learned what their father never did, how to make obedience eternal by writing it into memory. By early autumn, the leaves around Bell River browned before their time. Even the cicadas had fallen silent. Something in the air had shifted, an invisible boundary between the living and the remembered. Marcus felt it in the back of his throat every time he breathed. Dust, smoke, and the faint taste of metal. The twins stopped leaving their rooms before sunset. Curtains stayed drawn. When they did emerge, they moved through the halls like reflections, each gesture mirrored, every glance deliberate. They no longer spoke to the overseer. They no longer issued orders. The plantation ran itself now, as though the habits of command had become self-sustaining. The system no longer needed masters. It had learned to feed on its own momentum. Marcus kept writing, not in his secret book anymore. He had burned that. He wrote everywhere else, between ledger lines, under table leaves, along the beams of the carriage house, words scratched into wood, inked beneath furniture, hidden where fire might not reach. He no longer wrote to survive. He wrote to be found. In his last coherent entry, the tone changed from chronicler to prophet. Control cannot last forever. When the hand releases, the memory must decide which truth remains. If I am ash, let the ash speak. He began noticing details that didn't belong to this world. The clocks ticking backward for a few seconds each hour, the mirrors fogging even in dry heat, the faint echo of two voices whispering where only one stood. He knew he was being watched, but he also sensed that the watchers feared something too, an ending they couldn't contain. One night, as thunder rolled low over the Alabama plains, Marcus carried a small tin box to the courthouse in Hanville. Inside, scraps of ledger paper, fragments of code, and a note addressed to whomever remembers. He buried it beneath the records room floor, sealing it with wax and a prayer. The next morning, a heavy stillness blanketed Bell River. Smoke lingered in the horizon from somewhere unseen. In the mirror, Marcus thought he saw not one reflection, but three, himself and two figures standing behind him, faces pale, eyes dark as oil. When he turned, the hallway was empty. The last line he ever wrote was etched into the margin of a burnt ledger found a century later. They thought they were preserving power, but power only survives when someone believes the story. It began before dawn, without thunder, without warning, just a deep tremor through the ground, the faintest scent of oil and ash drifting from the direction of town. Marcus had been awake for hours, sitting by the window, watching the horizon. He wrote nothing that night. His hands would not stop shaking. The silence outside had grown so thick it pressed against the glass. When the first glow appeared beyond the tree line, he knew what it meant. The courthouse in Hanville was burning. The column of smoke climbed into the sky like a signal no one dared to answer. Bells rang once, then fell quiet. The people of Lowndes County would later tell themselves that a lamp had overturned in the clerk's office, an accident, unfortunate but ordinary. Yet every man who saw the blaze that morning would remember how the flames moved, deliberate, contained, too fast to be chance. Inside Belle River, the twins were already awake. The moment Marcus stepped into the hall, he saw them at the landing. White gowns, bare feet, faces calm as glass. Sarah held a folded paper against her chest. Catherine carried a single candle. "It's begun," Sarah said, "the fire that purifies." Marcus didn't answer. He knew what they had done. The courthouse held the last official record of Belle River's existence. The deeds, the inventories, the transactions that proved the experiment ever happened. With those gone, the plantation would fade into rumor, and the sisters would become myth. But there was something they hadn't accounted for. The copies Marcus had hidden, the coded messages buried under wood and stone, the small tin box beneath the courthouse floor. Truth, like fire, spreads unseen before it breaks into light. By midday, ash fell like snow across the county. The courthouse collapsed inward with a sound that echoed through the valleys. Witnesses later swore they saw figures moving in the smoke, 3 silhouettes chained together, walking into the fire without struggle. No one ever proved it, but the story endured, retold in whispers that blurred fact and memory until no one could tell which was which. That night, the Alabama sky glowed a sickly red long after the flames had died. Marcus's cabin stood empty. The sisters were never seen again. And on the charred ruins of Hanville's courthouse, someone, no one knows who, carved a single phrase into the remaining stone. "Nothing burns that remembers."
When dawn finally broke over Lowndes County, it revealed a world that looked the same, but felt entirely different. The courthouse was gone, reduced to a field of blackened stone and twisted iron. What should have been a tragedy was met with quiet relief. The officials called it an accident. The newspapers printed 2 paragraphs. Then the silence began. But silence has weight, and in the years that followed, it pressed on the people of Hanville like humidity before a storm. Records vanished. Deeds changed hands without signatures. Families who had lived beside Belle River for generations suddenly denied they had ever known the Sutton name. Yet every child in town grew up with the same nightmare: a white house with 12 windows, burning from the inside out. By 1871, the plantation itself was gone. The land sold, then sold again, parceled into fields that refused to grow. Travelers said the soil smelled of smoke even after rain. Others claimed to see 2 figures at the edge of the property at dusk, women standing hand in hand, their dresses blackened, veils, faces hidden by veils. No one ever stayed long enough to be sure. But history, no matter how deep it's buried, leaves traces. In 1934, during renovations of the rebuilt courthouse, workers found fragments of metal beneath the floor, what looked like hinges, rusted chains, and the warped lid of a small tin box. Inside were scraps of paper, fused by heat, but still legible. 3 words repeated over and over in different handwriting: "Remember the witness." A local teacher, curious but cautious, sent the fragments to the University of Alabama. They were catalogued, sealed, and forgotten until 1963, when a graduate student unsealed the file for a thesis on rural superstition and postbellum memory. What she read made her resign within a week. The file was resealed under a different name: Sutton Estate, Restricted.
Even now, what's inside those pages remains off-limits. Officially, the Sutton twins never existed. The Bell River plantation is listed as an unverified site. Marcus, the man who wrote more truth than anyone dared to speak, is classified as unknown laborer. But people still drive that road at night, past the stretch of oak where the plantation once stood. If you stop your car and kill the engine, you can hear it, the faint scratching of pencil on paper, somewhere beneath the soil. And if you listen long enough, you'll realize the sound isn't coming from below. It's coming from inside your own memory, writing the story back into you. In 2019, a researcher named Eliza Morvan arrived in Hanville with a grant from a northern university and a question no one in the county wanted to hear. What really happened at Bell River? She wasn't a folklorist or a ghost hunter. She specialized in suppressed archives, documents destroyed or altered by governments to shape public memory. And she'd come to Alabama chasing a rumor that every archivist before her had learned to avoid. Her first day in the county courthouse, the clerk told her there was nothing to see. The old fire had wiped everything clean, he said. But in archives, nothing is where the story hides. In the stacks of brittle records, she found a single misfiled folder, thin, charred, marked S, Sutton, unsorted. Inside were three things: a half-burned ledger page, a photograph of two women standing in front of a white-columned house, and a transcription note signed with a name she didn't recognize, M. Sutton, 1948. That night, in her motel room, she studied the page. The handwriting wasn't her father's nor her grandfather's. It was precise, deliberate, like a man documenting a world no one believed. In the margin, faint but visible under UV light, she saw the words Marcus had written a century and a half before: "If memory dies here, the fire wins." Over the next 6 months, Eliza traced the pattern through library collections, museum basements, even church registries. Every place she looked, she found the same subtle distortions: names erased, dates rewritten, whole family lines dissolved into unknown. The pattern mirrored the ledgers Marcus had described, the same structure of omission turned into official truth. She realized the Sutton experiment hadn't ended in 1849. It had evolved. She found her final clue in an old Mobile hospital log. Among the patient names was a note, scrawled in red ink: "Recovered from Hanville, claims to be last witness. No age, no race, no description. Just that line. Beneath it, a code of numbers matching the same sequence Marcus had used in his journal centuries earlier." That night, Eliza stopped sleeping. She began seeing things in reflections, two figures, always together, always silent. Her notes filled with patterns, symbols, phrases she didn't remember writing. One phrase appeared over and over, like an echo returning through time: "Truth dies only when the last witness forgets." When she finally sent her findings to the university, the email bounced back with an error message. Her account was deleted the next day. The archive room she had worked in was sealed for renovation. The official report listed her as having resigned due to stress, but the locals in Hanville say her rental car is still parked on Bell River Road, empty, the keys still in the ignition.
Listen carefully. Up to now, you've been hearing this as a story. Dates, names, fire, rumor. But stories like this survive because they aren't only about the dead. They're about the living. What Eliza uncovered wasn't a haunting. It was a design. An old blueprint for power still running quietly underneath everything we call modern. When she compared the ledgers from Bell River to corporate property records from a century later, she found the same marks of absence. Names dissolved into numbers. Entire histories reduced to codes. The handwriting had changed, but the purpose hadn't. The Sutton twins had learned to erase people by rewriting them. Today, the method looks different, but the effect is the same. Information replaced with narrative, facts with noise, identity with label. She tried to tell people this, tried to publish. The journals called her work conspiratorial, psychologically unstable. It's the same language used in 1849 to describe Marcus when he spoke of mirrors that remembered. The point isn't whether the mirrors were real. The point is that the people in power needed you to believe they weren't. Because if memory can't be trusted, then control never needs chains. Look around you now. Data replaced ledgers. Screens replaced mirrors. But the rule hasn't changed. Whoever writes the record decides what's real. And the rest of us, well, we inherit the silence. Eliza's last notes, found scribbled across motel stationery, weren't warnings. They were instructions. In between sketches of ciphered words and diagrams of overlapping circles, she wrote, "They built the first template at Bell River. It still functions. It needs believers to complete the circuit." She underlined that word twice. Believers. Not readers, not victims, believers. And here's where you come in. If you've stayed through this story, if you've felt that strange pull in your stomach while hearing it, you're already part of it. The old pattern waits for attention. It feeds on witness. Marcus knew that. The twins knew it. Eliza finally understood. So if you want to step out of their circle, break the pattern, do one simple thing. Speak the phrase aloud, twice. Write it in the comments. It isn't superstition, it's signal. It's the act that separates the listener from the echo. The phrase is the same one that survived every burning, carved into the courthouse stone. Nothing burns that remembers. Write it twice. Lock it in. At this point, the story turns into a legend that keeps people awake, the way an unfinished sentence does. In the months after Eliza disappeared, scattered readers began finding her words online, snippets, screenshots, fragments of code. Each time someone typed or spoke the old phrase, new files surfaced from nowhere, a mirror image of the same documents she had tried to release. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then the pattern hardened. 1,000 screens lit up with identical messages from nowhere. Nothing burns that remembers. It wasn't a curse, not even a secret handshake. It was a reminder, a push against the weight of forgetting. What happened next wasn't magic, it was recognition. People began noticing the missing lines in their own records, the quiet revisions in their textbooks, the way whole years of history seemed to have slipped into footnotes. They saw how the same logic that ruled Bell River had changed clothes, but not intent. Control doesn't always scream. It edits. It edits what you see, what you recall, what you're allowed to name. It lives in the way stories are told. One version highlighted, another quietly deleted. And once you start to notice that pattern, it follows you everywhere. In the language of headlines, in the numbers on a report, in the faint echo of a phrase you've heard before but can't place. People began writing the phrase on walls, notebooks, bathroom mirrors. Some said it helped them remember what was real, what was theirs. Others said it made them dream of a courthouse collapsing in slow motion, of ash turning into ink. No one agreed on what it meant, and maybe that was the point. The phrase wasn't about belief, it was about attention. If you're still here, listening, you don't need to believe in ghosts or conspiracies. You only need to believe in the fragility of memory. The ones who built systems like Bell River relied on forgetting. It was their most efficient tool. So when you whisper, "Nothing burns that remembers," you aren't invoking the dead. You're reminding yourself that the story of power is always rewritten, but never completely erased. And if that idea settles under your skin tonight, if you catch yourself watching the reflection on your screen a little longer than usual, that's not fear. That's memory waking up.
Within a year, the phrase had moved far beyond Hanville. Someone spray-painted it on a bridge in Atlanta. A podcaster in Detroit opened every episode with it. Anonymous accounts turned it into a tag on archives of declassified files and forgotten photographs. No one claimed ownership. No one tried to sell it. It spread the way an old song does, quietly, insistently, as if it had been waiting to be remembered. It wasn't rebellion in the usual sense. There were no marches, no manifestos. The change began in smaller gestures. An historian double-checking the wording of a treaty. A journalist refusing to edit a quote to fit a headline. A teacher asking her students to read the paragraph that textbooks left out. Each act of remembering pushed back against the kind of power that thrives in silence. Governments called it digital superstition. Companies dismissed it as a meme. But the networks built around the phrase weren't organized movements, they were mirrors, each person reflecting another's refusal to forget. The phrase became a test. Whisper it and see who listened, who looked away. It created a map of those who still believed that truth, though fragile, was worth the risk of holding. In some places, old archives began to reopen. Librarians found missing ledgers that no one had requested in decades. Pages half burned from the courthouse fire reappeared in estate collections. When examined under ultraviolet light, they revealed the faint impressions of handwriting that shouldn't have survived. Marcus's codes. The same pattern Eliza had seen. People began decoding them collectively online. Thousands of hands, thousands of screens. Every message ended differently, but the structure stayed the same. A reminder that forgetting was never natural, it was engineered. And as the fragments came together, they revealed something larger than Bell River. The same mathematics of erasure ran through redlined neighborhoods, censored letters, datasets scrubbed of names. The plantation's logic had gone global. You can't burn what remembers, but you can drown it in noise, bury it under convenience, feed it to distraction. That's how control works now, not through silence, but through endless talking that says nothing. So pause. Listen. Feel the weight of what isn't said. If you can hold that silence without turning away, you've already broken part of the spell. You've heard enough ghost stories to know how this usually ends. Someone uncovers the secret, pays the price, and the audience walks away with a shiver. That's not what this is. This story was never about haunting. It's about how control hides in plain sight. If you want to see it, don't look for flames or masks or conspiracies. Look for what's missing. Look at the blank space between what's said and what's meant. When a record shows numbers, but not names. When a headline tells you what to feel before you've seen the facts. When a platform removes something quietly for your safety. That's the new Bell River. Everywhere. Invisible. efficient. Remember what the twins built. Not cruelty for its own sake, but a system where obedience was invisible. The house ran itself. The servants enforced the silence because it was easier than asking why. The same principle works now. You don't have to fear the whip if you've already accepted the story. This is how you recognize it. When you feel numb to the repetition of tragedy. When you catch yourself scrolling past suffering because it looks like everything else. When outrage becomes entertainment and history feels optional. That's the rhythm of the new experiment, and it's working. But here's the thing no system of control can survive. Attention. Not panic, not rage, just quiet, persistent attention. The kind Marcus practiced when he copied names. The kind Eliza used when she traced the codes. To remember is to interrupt. So the next time you read an article, listen for what's missing. When you see an image, ask what was cropped out. When you repeat a story, check whose voice you're using. Every small act of remembering is an act of defiance. Every question is a spark. If you hold on to that, the experiment collapses. Because the only power the lie ever had was the willingness of good people to forget. Look at your screen right now. The reflection you see there, that's the mirror Belle River left behind. It doesn't ask you to believe. It asks you to notice.
There's a reason people turn away from the mirror. Remembering hurts. It stretches the mind between what you've been told and what you can feel is true. Most of us spend our whole lives trying not to feel that gap. When you begin to notice it, something strange happens inside you. The world looks the same, but slightly out of focus. Conversations sound rehearsed. Advertisements whisper the same promises in different colors. You start to sense the pattern underneath everything, the repetition that keeps the wheel turning. That's when the fear comes, not of ghosts, not of monsters, but of seeing too clearly. Because if you see it, you can't unsee it. If you understand, you can't pretend ignorance. And if you remember, you inherit responsibility. Marcus wrote about this once. The price of witness is loneliness. He wasn't wrong. When you refuse to forget, you step out of rhythm with the world around you. People will call you paranoid, dramatic, obsessive. They called Eliza that. They called anyone that who tried to hold the line between memory and comfort. But there's another side to the loneliness. Once you stop waiting for permission to know, you realize you were never alone. The same memory that isolates you also connects you to everyone who ever looked at the fire and refused to turn away. So this is where the work begins. You don't fight control with noise. You dismantle it with attention. You don't shout the truth. You keep it alive, quietly, daily. When you pass a forgotten name, say it aloud. When you see a blank in the record, fill it. When you catch yourself numbing out, stop, feel. You won't win quickly. The systems that feed on forgetting are patient. They've been perfecting themselves for centuries, but they depend on your fatigue. The moment you rest your attention, they rebuild. Remember this, fear is part of the inheritance, but so is endurance. The ones who burned Belle River believed they could erase the past. What they didn't understand is that memory doesn't obey fire. It obeys will. You're still here, listening. That means the memory survived another generation. And that's all it ever needed. Someone to keep watching the mirror when the room goes dark. You've learned by now that the mirror isn't a thing. It's a practice. It isn't haunted glass or a superstition. It's the quiet moment when you stop performing for the world and ask yourself, what part of the story am I repeating without knowing it? That's the most dangerous question in any society. Because every system of control relies on reflection. It teaches you to mirror its values, its fears, its language. When you speak without thinking, it speaks through you. When you judge without understanding, it wins again. Look long enough into that mirror and you'll see how subtle it is. The way exhaustion becomes apathy. The way ambition disguises obedience. The way fear dresses itself as pragmatism. That's what the Sutton sisters understood. Their experiment was never really about domination. It was about replication. They built a world that would perpetuate itself generation after generation, long after their names had vanished. The only way to break the mirror's spell is to see yourself as part of it. You can't dismantle control while pretending you're untouched by it. The questions you avoid, the distractions you chase, the moments you say, "That's just how things are," those are the places it hides. Here's how the work begins. Close your eyes and trace the last decision you made out of habit rather than thought. See where that habit came from. Who benefits from it? What fear did it soothe? What desire did it feed? That's the map. That's where the old experiment still lives. Now open your eyes again. Every day you practice awareness, the pattern weakens. Every time you notice the small manipulations, advertisements that borrow your longing, headlines that trade your attention, you cut another thread. The mirror becomes something new. Not a weapon, a compass. It doesn't show you how to escape the world, but how to navigate it without losing yourself. Marcus wrote about this. If you remember clearly enough, the walls begin to crack. Eliza proved him right. She didn't fight the story. She learned to read its edges, to see where the light leaked through. That's what you're doing now. You stopped listening as a spectator. You started listening as a participant. And the moment that happens, the moment you realize the mirror isn't watching you, but waiting for you, that's when the story starts to change.
Awareness is the door, not the destination. Once you see the pattern, you face a harder question. What will you build in its place? Because the moment you stop feeding the system that thrives on forgetting, you create an empty space. And empty space terrifies the world. It rushes to fill it with the familiar, noise, distraction, fear. So this is where creation becomes resistance. You don't fight the lie by screaming at it. You crowd it out with new stories, stories that don't erase, that don't need permission to exist. You take the space that forgetting carved out and plant something that remembers. Marcus did that with his journal. He wasn't writing for approval or for safety. He was writing so the truth could outlast him. Eliza followed his example with the tools of her time, data, archives, networks. They both understood the same rule, that memory without action decays, and action without memory repeats. Look around you now. Every voice that refuses to vanish is part of this same lineage. A singer turning a protest chant into melody, an artist painting the erased faces back into history, a student demanding the real story behind the textbook. Each one an act of rebuilding, each one proof that the mirror can reflect something other than obedience. It won't be easy. The world will keep offering easier paths, cynicism disguised as wisdom, apathy packaged as calm. You'll be told that remembering too much will break you, but forgetting breaks you more slowly. It erodes your sense of meaning until you mistake numbness for peace. So hold the discomfort close. Let it shape you, not shrink you. The ones who came before you carried the same weight. They left maps in the margins, songs, stories, coded phrases like "nothing burns that remembers." Follow those marks. Add your own. Because the end of control isn't collapse, it's imagination. It's the quiet, patient act of creating something that can't be bought or erased, a truth so ordinary, so persistent, that no one can turn it into spectacle. This is how you honor the witness. Not by mourning what was lost, but by building what should have been there all along.
Every awakening starts alone. One person notices, another listens, a third begins to speak. And then, without ceremony, something begins to move between them, an invisible current that joins private awareness into collective sight. That's when the quiet remembering becomes something larger. Not rebellion, not chaos, but coherence. History tries to teach us that change requires spectacle, crowds, banners, noise. But the truth moves differently. It begins in kitchens, on late-night calls, in notebooks no one will ever publish. It moves through trust, through small moments when one person looks at another and says, "I remember too." That's how the circle begins to widen. An archivist shares an unredacted photo. A teacher rewrites a lesson plan. A coder designs a tool that tracks how words are erased from headlines. Tiny sparks, scattered but connected, shaping a map of memory that no single authority can destroy. You see, the system that grew from Bell River was built on isolation, making each person feel like a separate failure, a single powerless witness. Community shatters that illusion. When memory is shared, it becomes armor. When truth is spoken aloud by more than one voice, it becomes undeniable. But collective remembering is dangerous work. The old structures will call it revisionism, disinformation, heresy. They'll tell you to be quiet for the sake of order. That's how they always speak, soft, reasonable, tired. They sound like safety, but safety that silences is just control wearing a friendlier face. If you feel that weight pressing on you, remember this. Marcus wrote for those he'd never meet. Eliza searched for someone she didn't know existed. They both believed that if enough people remembered together, the story could change its shape. And it is changing. Every time someone tells a forgotten name, or rescues a record from the trash, or refuses to let a lie become history, the circle expands. The light that leaks through the cracks in the old story grows brighter. It's not about saving the world in one gesture. It's about saving the thread that connects us. Because when memory becomes shared, it stops being fragile. It becomes a living thing, breathing, adapting, teaching us how to begin again.
And now you know why this story had to be told. Not because of ghosts or curses, but because remembering is the most radical act left in a world built on forgetting. You've walked through the ashes of Bell River. You've met the witness, seen the mirror, heard the phrase that refuses to die. But this is only one thread in a web that stretches across centuries. The Sutton sisters were not unique. They were an early symptom of a sickness that still hides beneath the polite language of progress, beneath the glowing screens and endless scroll. The experiment continues every time a truth is edited, every time a story is shortened to make it easier to sell. So what happens now depends on you. If you felt that pull, that vibration in the spine that says there's more here, don't let it fade. Remember, question, and keep following the trail. Every week, we bring another piece of the forbidden record into the light. Stories that history tried to bury, truths that still breathe beneath the dust. If you're new here, subscribe and stay close. We don't chase fear, we study it. We don't look for monsters, we uncover the hands that made them. And tell me, what do you want to unearth next? Which secret should we open in the next descent? Write it below. Tell me the place, the rumor, the name that history erased. Because every comment builds the map of what still matters. And when you do, when you add your voice to this circle of witnesses, remember the phrase that carried us here. Nothing burns that remembers. Say it once for them, once for yourself, then breathe. Because the next story is already waiting beneath your feet.
The story ends the same way every truth begins, quietly. A house in Alabama turned to ash, a journal hidden beneath stone, a single phrase carved into fireproof walls. And yet somehow it reached you. That's how memory travels, hand to hand, voice to voice, through time. What started as Marcus's secret became a century of silence, then Eliza's obsession, and now your inheritance. You've seen what happens when power rewrites reality. You felt how forgetting feeds the machine. So before you leave this place, take one breath and decide, are you going to look away or are you going to keep watching? Because the fire that burned Bell River didn't die. It changed form. It glows in the screens we hold, in the data that defines us, in the stories we're told about who we are. Every view, every click, every comment is another stroke of the pen in history's new ledger. If you've stayed this long, you're part of the circle now. That means you don't have to listen alone. Subscribe so you never lose the thread. Hit the bell so the next door opens when it's ready. And tell me in the comments what truth you want unearthed next. Maybe it's a town that vanished from every map. Maybe it's a family name erased from a census. Maybe it's something that still keeps you awake at night. You choose where we go next. The descent continues only when the witnesses gather.